There exists a peculiar paradox in the halls of power that Niccolò Machiavelli observed with surgical precision 5 centuries ago. The loudest voices in any room are rarely the most influential, and those who speak constantly are seldom the ones truly steering the ship. In the cutthroat courts of Renaissance Italy, where a misplaced word could mean exile or assassination, Machiavelli watched as quiet individuals accumulated power while verbose nobles destroyed themselves with their own tongues. He noticed something profound about human nature that remains devastatingly relevant today. Silence is not the absence of power, but often its purest concentration. The quiet person sitting in the corner, observing while others perform, listening while others pontificate, absorbing while others expend, possesses advantages that the gregarious never suspect and the talkative never understand. The psychology of the quiet person begins with a fundamental difference in how they process the world. While extroverts gain energy from external stimulation and think out loud, processing their thoughts through speech, quiet individuals tend toward internal processing. They observe first, analyze second, and speak only third, if at all. This sequence gives them a strategic advantage that Machiavelli would immediately recognize. By the time they speak, they have already mapped the terrain, identified the players, understood the dynamics, and calculated their move. The extrovert speaks to discover what they think. The quiet person thinks to discover what to say. This difference appears subtle, but its consequences echo through every interaction, every negotiation, every power dynamic. Machiavelli understood that information is power, and quiet people are exceptional information gatherers. When everyone else is talking, competing for attention, performing their knowledge and opinions, the quiet person is listening, not passive hearing, but active, strategic listening that most people never practice. They notice not just what is said, but how it is said, not just the content, but the subtext. They detect the tension in someone's voice when a particular topic arises. They observe who glances at whom when a controversial subject surfaces. They register who interrupts whom, who defers to whom, who avoids eye contact with whom. This constant absorption of social data creates a comprehensive understanding of group dynamics that the talkers, focused on their own performance, never develop. Consider what happens in a typical business meeting. The extroverts dominate the conversation, bouncing ideas off each other, debating vigorously, filling every silence with words. They leave feeling productive, energized by the interaction. Meanwhile, the quiet person has said perhaps 3 sentences the entire hour. Yet they leave with something far more valuable: a complete understanding of everyone's positions, priorities, fears, and alliances. They know who is really making decisions versus who is merely posturing. They have identified the unspoken conflicts, the hidden agendas, the political undercurrents. When they finally do speak, often days later in a one-on-one conversation with the actual decision-maker, they can frame their ideas with precision because they understand exactly what that person cares about, what concerns they harbor, what arguments will resonate. The quiet person also benefits from what psychologists call the observer effect. When you remain silent in social situations, people forget you are there, or more accurately, they stop performing for you. Humans constantly adjust their behavior based on who is watching and listening. We curate our image, manage impressions, say things we think others want to hear, but sustained silence from one party creates a strange phenomenon. People stop treating you as part of the audience. They become more authentic, more revealing, more careless with information they might otherwise guard. Machiavelli would recognize this as strategic invisibility, the power of being present but not prominent, observing but not observed. There is also a profound psychological impact that silence has on others. Humans are deeply uncomfortable with conversational voids. We are social creatures programmed to maintain connection through communication, and silence threatens that connection. When a quiet person fails to fill their expected role in social lubrication, something fascinating happens. Others rush to fill the vacuum. They talk more, reveal more, expose more than they intended. In negotiations, the side that speaks first after an offer typically loses advantage. The quiet person understands this instinctively. They can sit with uncomfortable silence, can allow tension to build, can wait while others squirm and eventually compromise with themselves, offering concessions that were never requested simply to break the oppressive weight of that silence. Machiavelli observed that fear and respect, properly balanced, create optimal conditions for influence. The quiet person generates both. There is something unsettling about someone who watches and listens but rarely speaks. What are they thinking? What are they planning? This uncertainty creates mild anxiety in others, a low-level wariness that translates into respect. When the quiet person finally does speak, people pay attention precisely because they speak rarely. Their words carry weight that the constant talker's words can never possess. Scarcity creates value. A diamond is precious because it is rare. Water is essential, but cheap because it is abundant. The quiet person's words are diamonds, while the talkers are water everywhere and taken for granted. The quiet person also enjoys protection from a trap that ensnares the verbose. They rarely commit premature verbal mistakes. Machiavelli warned repeatedly about the danger of words spoken hastily, promises made impulsively, positions declared prematurely. Once spoken, words become commitments that bind you, that can be used against you, that limit your flexibility. The quiet person makes few such errors because they simply speak less. They do not promise what they cannot deliver because they rarely promise anything. They do not lock themselves into positions because they rarely declare positions publicly. This reserve preserves maximum strategic flexibility, allowing them to observe how situations develop before committing to a course of action. In leadership contexts, quiet individuals often surprise people with their effectiveness. The cultural stereotype assumes leaders must be charismatic speakers, commanding presence through vocal dominance and forceful personality. Yet some of history's most effective leaders were notably quiet. They led not through inspiring speeches, but through careful listening, strategic questions, and decisive action when action was required. Machiavelli himself noted that the wise prince speaks little but observes much, reserving judgment until facts are clear rather than rushing to loud declarations that may prove embarrassing later. These quiet leaders understand something profound. Leadership is not about having the most words, but about making the right decisions. And right decisions require information, perspective, and careful thought, all of which silence facilitates better than constant talking. The quiet person's power also stems from their ability to control their own narrative. In an age of oversharing, where people broadcast every thought, feeling, and activity to the world, the quiet person remains a mystery. This mystery creates fascination. Human beings are intensely curious creatures, and we are especially curious about what is hidden. The person who shares everything becomes boring through familiarity. We know all their stories, all their opinions, all their quirks. The quiet person sharing little remains perpetually interesting because perpetually unknown. People project onto this blank canvas, often attributing depth, intelligence, and significance that may or may not exist. The quiet person benefits from this projection, gaining credit for wisdom they may not possess simply because they have not spoken enough to dispel the illusion. There is also emotional regulation advantage that quiet people typically possess. Speaking less often correlates with feeling less compelled to react immediately to events and provocations. While the talkative person blurts out their anger, frustration, or excitement, often regretting it later, the quiet person processes internally first. They feel the emotion, but do not immediately express it, giving themselves time to choose a response rather than simply reacting. Machiavelli emphasized the importance of controlling one's emotions in political contexts, noting that appearing calm and measured, even when internally turbulent, grants tremendous advantage. The quiet person's natural inclination toward internal processing facilitates this emotional control. However, Machiavelli would also warn quiet people about their vulnerabilities. Silence can be misinterpreted as weakness, lack of knowledge, or social anxiety, rather than strategic choice. In some contexts, complete silence means exclusion from decision-making processes, because others assume you have nothing to contribute. The truly strategic quiet person learns when to speak and how to speak with maximum impact. They understand that their rare words must be well chosen, substantive, and delivered with appropriate confidence. A quiet person who speaks timidly when they finally do speak wastes their accumulated advantage. But one who speaks rarely yet speaks with calm authority and evident thoughtfulness becomes formidable. The quiet person must also guard against becoming so comfortable with silence that they fail to act when action is required. Machiavelli had no patience for passive observation, divorced from strategic purpose. Silence is powerful when it serves information gathering, strategic positioning, or calculated intimidation. But silence that stems from mere avoidance, from fear of engagement, from passive hoping that problems will resolve themselves, is weakness disguised as strategy. The powerful, quiet person knows the difference between strategic silence and fearful hiding. In the modern workplace, quiet people face specific challenges and opportunities. Open office plans, constant meetings, and cultural bias toward extroversion can make silence feel like a liability. Organizations often promote the people who speak up in meetings, who network aggressively, who maintain high visibility. The quiet person risks being overlooked despite potentially superior work quality or strategic thinking. Yet this same environment creates opportunities for those who understand silence's power. In a world of constant noise, the person who communicates concisely and meaningfully stands out. In organizations drowning in unnecessary meetings and empty talk, the person who listens carefully and speaks only when they have something valuable to say becomes recognized as efficient and substantive. The rise of digital communication has created interesting dynamics for quiet people. Email, text, and written communication generally favor those who think before they communicate, who craft careful messages rather than blurting immediate reactions. The quiet person who struggles in real-time verbal sparring may excel in written exchanges where they have time to compose thoughts. However, the expectation of immediate response to messages has eroded some of this advantage. The person who takes time to craft thoughtful responses may be perceived as slow or unresponsive in a culture demanding instant reaction. Machiavelli would counsel quiet people to be strategic about when and where they deploy their silence. In contexts where relationships matter more than transactions, some level of social communication becomes necessary. People tend to trust those they know, and remaining perpetually silent and mysterious can create distance that prevents alliance formation. The skilled quiet person learns to engage socially when strategically valuable, while maintaining their fundamental preference for listening over speaking. They share enough to seem human and approachable, while revealing little of strategic significance. There is also wisdom in understanding that different situations demand different approaches. A crisis requiring immediate decisive action is not the time for prolonged silent observation. When your expertise is specifically needed, remaining silent serves no purpose. When someone genuinely needs your input or support, withholding it for strategic reasons becomes cruel rather than clever. The mature quiet person develops judgment about when their natural inclination towards silence serves them and when it does not. The psychology of silence also involves understanding what others project onto quiet people. Some see wisdom and depth, others see judgment and coldness, still others see weakness and social incompetence. The quiet person cannot control these projections entirely, but they can influence them through non-verbal communication. A quiet person who maintains eye contact, who shows engagement through body language, who nods and responds non-verbally, creates a very different impression than one who seems checked out or uncomfortable. The former appears thoughtfully reserved, the latter appears awkwardly withdrawn. Machiavelli recognized that perception often matters more than reality in power dynamics. The quiet person who projects confidence, competence, and calm authority through their demeanor gains the benefits of silence without its potential costs. They are seen as strong and strategic rather than weak and awkward. This requires self-awareness and intentionality that many naturally quiet people must develop consciously. Their silence must appear as choice rather than compulsion, as strength rather than fear. The long-term advantages of being a quiet person in positions of power are substantial. You accumulate knowledge about people, situations, and dynamics that the talkers never gather. You avoid the countless small mistakes and gaffes that plague those who speak without thinking. You maintain flexibility because you have not locked yourself into publicly declared positions. You preserve energy that others exhaust on constant social performance. You develop a reputation for thoughtfulness and substance rather than superficiality and volume. These advantages compound over time, creating a foundation of influence that does not require constant maintenance or performance. Yet perhaps the most profound advantage is internal rather than external. The quiet person who embraces their nature rather than fighting it experiences less social exhaustion, less anxiety about performance, less regret over words spoken hastily. They operate from their natural strengths rather than constantly trying to become someone they are not. This authenticity, paradoxically, often proves more powerful than any forced persona could be. People sense when someone is comfortable in their own skin, and that comfort creates trust in ways that performance never quite achieves. Machiavelli lived in a loud world of grand pronouncements and theatrical posturing, yet he recognized that the quietest players often proved most dangerous. They watched while others performed, learned while others postured, and acted decisively when others exhausted themselves with words. 5 centuries later, in a world even louder and more verbose than his, this wisdom remains profound. The psychology of silence, properly understood and strategically deployed, represents not social deficit but tactical superiority, not weakness but concentrated strength, not absence but presence of the most powerful kind. The quiet person who understands this, who embraces their nature as strategic advantage rather than social handicap, possesses power that the loudest voice in any room can never match.